In just 47 seconds, a tiny USB drive containing 2.3 terabytes of evidence and 47 implicated names was about to detonate the biggest scandal in federal courthouse history. Judge Clarence Thomas sat motionless behind the bench, his expression unreadable. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett stood at the podium, her hand trembling slightly as she reached into her briefcase. The courtroom was packed. Every seat filled. Cameras positioned at perfect angles. Security doubled at every entrance. Nobody expected what was coming next. Not the defense attorneys frantically whispering to each other. Not the prosecutors who thought they'd seen everything. And certainly not the 47 people whose names were encrypted on that drive. Because what Jasmine Crockett was about to present would expose a network so vast, so deeply embedded in the system, that many believed it was untouchable. Thomas leaned forward. Just an inch, but everyone noticed. The silence was deafening. The morning nobody saw coming. Let me take you back 6 hours. 6:47 a.m., Washington, D.C. The morning fog hadn't lifted yet. Jasmine Crockett sat in her office, staring at 3 monitors displaying information that had kept her awake for 72 hours straight. Her legal team had advised against this move. Too risky. Too many powerful people involved. Too much could go wrong. But Crockett had spent 18 months building this case. 18 months of following digital breadcrumbs. 18 months of watching evidence disappear. 18 months of witnesses suddenly changing their testimonies. She knew what she was up against. The case itself seemed straightforward on the surface. Alleged corruption within federal contracting processes. Boring stuff. The kind of thing that usually gets buried on page 47 of obscure legal journals. But Crockett had discovered something else. Something that connected this case to 12 others. Cases that had been dismissed. Cases that had been settled quietly. Cases where evidence had mysteriously vanished from secure servers. She'd found the pattern. And patterns don't lie. The players in position. By 9:15 a.m., the major players had assembled. Judge Thomas entered the courtroom with his characteristic measured pace. No expression, no indication this would be anything other than routine proceedings. He'd presided over thousands of cases in his career. This was case number, who knows, what? But Thomas had a reputation. He listened. Really listened. While other judges interrupted, checked their watches, or clearly made up their minds before testimony concluded, Thomas absorbed every word, every document, every piece of evidence. He was known for his silence, for letting cases unfold without interference, for making decisions based purely on what was presented before him. This reputation was about to be tested like never before. The defense team arrived next. A parade of expensive suits and designer briefcases. 7 attorneys for 4 defendants. That alone told you something. Nobody brings 7 attorneys to a simple corruption case. They were confident. Laughing. One of them was literally checking stock prices on his phone as proceedings were about to begin. Then Crockett entered. Alone. Well, not completely alone. She had one paralegal. One. Carrying a single briefcase and a laptop bag that seemed unusually heavy. The defense attorneys smirked at each other. This was going to be easy. They had no idea. The case that wasn't what it seemed, Your Honor, if I may address a preliminary matter. Crockett began. Thomas nodded slightly. The universal judge signal for proceed. This court has been presented with a case involving $4.7 million in alleged contract fraud. 4 defendants. Straightforward documentation. The prosecution rests on paper trails, email communications, and bank transfers. The defense attorneys relaxed. They'd prepared for exactly this scenario. However, Crockett continued, her voice steady, During our investigation, we discovered that this case is not what it appears to be. Now she had everyone's attention. This case is not about 4.7 million. It's not about 4 defendants. And it's not about simple contract fraud. She paused. The courtroom was absolutely silent. This case is about a systematic network of corruption that has operated for over a decade, involving hundreds of individuals across multiple agencies, and totaling not millions, but billions in misappropriated funds. The defense team erupted. Objections flew. One attorney stood so quickly his chair fell backward, with a crash that echoed through the courtroom. Thomas raised one hand. Just one hand. Silence returned instantly. Ms. Crockett, he said, his voice calm. These are extraordinary claims. I trust you have extraordinary evidence. This was the moment. The moment everything had been building toward. Your Honor, Crockett said, reaching into her briefcase. I do. The USB drive. She pulled it out slowly. A small, black USB drive. Nothing special. You could buy one at any electronics store for $15. But this wasn't just any drive. Your Honor, I present evidence item 247B. This drive contains 2.3 terabytes of encrypted data collected over 18 months of investigation. 2.3 terabytes. To put that in perspective, that's roughly 300 hours of video, or 600 zeros and photos, or millions upon millions of documents. The defense attorneys went pale. One of them started texting frantically under the table. The encryption was necessary, Crockett explained, because 3 times during our investigation, our servers were breached. Twice, physical evidence was stolen from secured locations. And once, a key witness disappeared for 6 days before reappearing with complete amnesia about everything they'd previously testified to. Thomas leaned forward. That inch everyone noticed. Continue, he said quietly. On this drive, Your Honor, are the following complete financial records for 847 individuals. Communication logs spanning 8 years. Video evidence from security cameras that were supposedly malfunctioning. Audio recordings from devices that were allegedly turned off. And a complete network map showing how this organization operates. The courtroom erupted again. Journalists in the gallery scrambled for their phones. Security moved closer to the exits. Thomas didn't raise his hand this time. He just stared at the USB drive sitting on Crockett's podium. The network revealed. Allow me to explain how this network functions, Crockett said, pulling up a presentation on the courtroom's main screen. What appeared was stunning. A web of connections so complex it looked like a neural network diagram. Names connected to names. Companies connected to shell corporations. Bank accounts in 12 different countries. Assets hidden behind multiple layers of legal entities. The network operates in 3 tiers. Crockett explained, using a laser pointer to highlight sections of the diagram. Tier 1. The initiators. These are individuals within federal agencies who identify opportunities for exploitation. Contracts that can be manipulated. Regulations that can be bypassed. Budgets that can be diverted. She clicked to the next slide. Faces appeared. Some were defendants in this very case, but others were officials nobody had suspected. Tier 2. The facilitators. These are the contractors, lawyers, and business people who execute the actual transactions. They create the shell companies. They file the false paperwork. They move the money. More faces. More names. The defense attorneys were now hunched together, whispering urgently. Tier 3. The protectors. These are individuals positioned to interfere with investigations, suppress evidence, and intimidate witnesses. This slide was different. Many of the photos were marked with red Ks. 11 of the Tier 3 individuals, Crockett said quietly, are deceased. All died under unusual circumstances during the period when initial investigations were beginning. 3 car accidents, 4 sudden heart attacks, 2 apparent suicides, 1 boating incident, 1 fall from a building. The courtroom had gone from noisy to dead silent. Thomas removed his glasses, cleaned them slowly, put them back on. His face remained neutral, but everyone who knew him recognized this gesture. He only did this when something had genuinely shocked him. The evidence cascade. Your Honor, Crockett continued, I'd like to walk through just 3 examples of how this network operated. 3 cases that are documented in detail on this drive. She pulled up the first case. Case Alpha. A bore $340 million federal IT contract awarded to a company that had been incorporated exactly 6 days before the bid was submitted. A company that had no employees, no physical office, and no previous history of IT work. Documents filled the screen, incorporation papers, contract awards, bank transfers. The money was distributed through 17 different accounts over a period of 8 months. It eventually ended up funding luxury, real estate purchases, offshore investments, and, interestingly, campaign contributions to 32 different political campaigns. She clicked through a series of property photos, mansions, yachts, private jets. All of this from a company that supposedly built a database system that, according to the agency's own internal reports, never actually functioned. The second case was even more damning. Case Beta, a $230 million infrastructure maintenance contract. The work was certified as completed. Payments were processed. But when independent inspectors actually visited the sites, photos appeared on screen. Bridges with missing repairs, roads still full of potholes, drainage systems still broken. Nothing had been done. Not one single item on the contract had been completed. Yet the money was gone, and the certifications claiming the work was finished were signed by 12 different federal inspectors. Crockett paused, letting this sink in. Those 12 inspectors collectively purchased properties valued at $8.3 million during the 6 months following that project. All cash purchases. No mortgages. No loans. Thomas was taking notes now. Rapidly. His pen moving across his legal pad in a way court observers had rarely seen. And case Gamma, Crockett said, pulling up the third example, is perhaps the most disturbing. The darkest revelation. A $180 million emergency response contract awarded after a natural disaster. The contract was for temporary housing, food distribution, and medical supplies for disaster victims. Photos appeared, not of houses or supplies, but of warehouse receipts, empty lots, forged delivery confirmations. Your Honor, 67% of the supplies never existed. The housing units were never built. The food was never delivered. And 340 families who were promised emergency assistance received nothing while their claims were marked as fulfilled in the system. For the first time, emotion crept into Crockett's voice. Meanwhile, the money was distributed to a network of accounts that ultimately funded, among other things, vacation properties in 3 countries, 2 private aviation companies, and a luxury hotel chain. She turned to face the defense table directly. And the paper trail leads directly to the 4 defendants in this courtroom, who were not low-level participants in this scheme, but rather architects of the entire network. The lead defense attorney shot to his feet. Your Honor, this is outrageous speculation based on documentation? Crockett interrupted, her voice sharp. Every transaction is documented. Every communication is recorded. Every movement of funds is traced. It's all on this drive. Thomas held up his hand again. The court will examine this evidence, he said. But Ms. Crockett, You understand that you are making allegations that extend far beyond the scope of the original charges in this case. I do, Your Honor. And you understand that if this evidence is authentic, it implicates individuals who are not present in this courtroom. I do, Your Honor. And you understand that you are potentially exposing yourself to significant personal and professional risk by presenting this. Crockett didn't hesitate. I do, Your Honor. But I also understand that this is exactly why it has continued for so long. Because everyone who discovered it understood the risks and chose silence instead. Thomas's decision. Thomas looked at the USB drive, then at Crockett, then at the defense attorneys, who were now frantically conferring with each other and making phone calls outside the courtroom. The court will recess for 2 hours, he announced. I will personally review the preliminary materials on this drive. Upon reconvening, we will determine how to proceed. The bailiff called for everyone to rise as Thomas left the bench. But something unusual happened. Instead of returning to his chambers, through the back entrance as judges always do, Thomas walked directly to the prosecution table. He stood there for a moment, looking at the USB drive. Ms. Crockett, he said, his voice low enough that only those nearby could hear. Are you absolutely certain about the security of this evidence? Your Honor, there are 3 other copies in 3 different secure locations. And the encryption key is distributed across multiple individuals. If anything happens to me, or to this copy, the others will automatically be released to federal investigators and major media outlets. Thomas nodded slowly. You've thought this through? I've had to, Your Honor. He picked up the USB drive, held it for a moment, then looked at Crockett with an expression that was hard to read. 2 hours, he repeated. Then he left. The 2-hour war. What happened during those 2 hours became the subject of intense speculation. What we know for certain, 17 phone calls were made from the courthouse to Washington, D.C. 3 black SUVs with federal plates arrived and parked outside. The lead defense attorney tried to leave the building and was stopped by federal marshals. Someone attempted to remotely access the courthouse's computer systems and was blocked. 2 news helicopters began circling overhead. What Crockett did during those 2 hours was simple. She sat in a secured conference room with 2 federal marshals outside the door. And she waited. She later described it as the longest 2 hours of her life. I kept thinking about everything that could go wrong, she said in a later interview. What if the encryption didn't work? What if the evidence wasn't as strong as I thought? What if powerful people found a way to make this all disappear? But then I thought about the 340 families who never got their emergency housing. I thought about the billions stolen from taxpayers. I thought about the 11 people who died trying to stop this. And I realized that being afraid wasn't an option anymore. The return, when Thomas returned to the bench. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Word had spread. News crews were set up outside. Social media was exploding with speculation about what was happening. Thomas carried a folder. A thick folder. And his expression had changed. I have reviewed a preliminary sample of the evidence presented by Ms. Crockett, he began. Approximately 3% of the total documentation on the drive. He paused. In my 34 years on the bench, I have never encountered anything of this magnitude. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear breathing. The evidence appears to be extensively documented, cross-referenced, and substantiated. The financial transactions are traced through multiple verification methods. The communications are authenticated through digital forensics. The connections between individuals and entities are supported by primary source documentation. Another pause. However, this case as currently filed is insufficient to address the scope of what has been presented. The charges are too narrow. The defendants are too few, and the jurisdiction of this court may not extend to all the allegations contained in this evidence. Crockett's heart sank. Was he going to shut this down? Therefore, Thomas continued, I am taking the following actions. The bombshell. First, I am ordering that this evidence be immediately turned over to federal investigators from 3 separate agencies. Not one agency. 3. To prevent any single entity from controlling or suppressing this investigation. The defense attorneys looked sick. Second, I am issuing a protective order preventing any individual named in this evidence from leaving the country pending further investigation. One of the defense attorneys actually gasped. Third, I am referring this matter to the Department of Justice with a recommendation for immediate grand jury proceedings. Thomas looked directly at the defense table. Fourth, I am denying all motions to dismiss and all motions to suppress evidence. This case will proceed. And it will proceed transparently. He turned to Crockett. Ms. Crockett, you have opened a door that many have tried to keep closed. You have presented evidence that, if substantiated through full investigation, reveals corruption on a scale rarely seen in federal systems. He paused, and for the first time, something like emotion crossed his face. You have also put yourself in considerable danger. I am therefore ordering federal protection for you and your legal team effective immediately. Crockett's eyes widened. She hadn't expected that. And finally, Thomas said, his voice carrying through the silent courtroom, I want to say something that I rarely say from this bench. He looked around at everyone present. I became a judge because I believed in the rule of law. I believed that our systems, however imperfect, were designed to catch corruption and punish wrongdoing. I believed that truth, when properly documented and presented, would prevail. Today, I have seen evidence that my faith in these systems may have been naive. But I have also seen that when one person refuses to be silent, when one person is willing to risk everything to expose the truth, our systems can still function as intended. He picked up his gavel. This court is adjourned. Federal investigators will take custody of the evidence. All parties will remain available for immediate questioning. And America, I suspect, is about to learn some very uncomfortable truths about how their government has been operating. The gavel came down. What happened next? The fallout from that single courtroom session was immediate and massive. Within 48 hours, 23 individuals surrendered to authorities, 47 search warrants were executed, 129 bank accounts were frozen, 8 people attempted to flee the country and were stopped within 1 week. 3 separate federal investigations were launched. The original case expanded to involve 127 defendants. Congressional oversight hearings were scheduled. The estimated total of misappropriated funds exceeded $8.7 billion within 1 month. 847 individuals named on the drive had been interviewed, 341 charges had been filed, 12 plea deals had been negotiated. The network that had operated for over a decade was completely dismantled. The personal cost. But what about Jasmine Crockett? For the next 6 months, she lived under federal protection. She couldn't go home, couldn't maintain a normal routine, received death threats weekly. Was it worth it? A reporter asked her 3 months later. She thought for a long moment. I think about those 340 families every day, she said. I think about the billions stolen from taxpayers who are working 2 jobs to pay their bills. I think about the 11 people who died trying to stop this. So yes, it was worth it. Judge Thomas's legacy. As for Judge Thomas, the case became a defining moment in his career. He later wrote in a judicial opinion, "The law is only as strong as the courage of those willing to enforce it. And justice is only possible when truth is more powerful than fear." The quote was carved into the wall of the federal courthouse renovation, completed 2 years later. The lesson. So, what can we learn from this? That one person with evidence and courage can change everything. That systems designed to protect corruption can be broken. That justice delayed is not always justice denied. That 47 seconds, the time it took Jasmine Crockett to pull that USB drive from her briefcase and place it on the podium, can be enough to change history. The drive itself is now in a secure federal evidence facility, but copies of its contents are distributed across multiple locations, multiple agencies, multiple jurisdictions. Because the lesson learned was this: truth is too important to trust to any single person or institution. It must be distributed, protected, made impossible to suppress. The final word, the last word spoken in that historic courtroom session, came from Thomas as everyone was filing out. He called Crockett back to the bench. "Ms. Crockett," he said quietly, "you know they'll never forgive you for this." She nodded. "I know. You know your life will never be the same." "I know. You know that even with convictions and prison sentences, some of these people have enough power to make your life very difficult." "I know." Thomas looked at her for a long moment. "Good," he finally said. "Because that means you went in with your eyes open. That means you made a choice." "Yes, Your Honor, I did." "Then I'll see you at the next hearing. And Miss Crockett." "Yes, Your Honor. Thank you for reminding an old judge why he took this job in the first place." In just 47 seconds, a small USB drive changed everything. Not because of what it contained, though those 2.3 terabytes of evidence were devastating, but because one person decided that silence was no longer an option. That justice mattered more than personal safety. That truth, no matter how dangerous, must be spoken. Judge Thomas listened silently. Then Jasmine Crockett dropped the USB drive. And nothing was ever the same again.